I'll just jump in and I'll take this opportunity to thank you officially, Andrew, for presenting at iMoot this year. This is Vinny, by the way, from the iMoot team.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Vinny.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to have you along. Really interesting session, this one. I'm quite looking forward to this. Gareth's lost his microphone. So yeah, thank you again from the iMoot team, and yeah, launch into it when you're ready to start. Cheers.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, this session is Can in Moodle. So I've got first an introduction slide to me, so you all know who I am. So this is me here with my daughter eating crisps. I work for a company called Epic Learning Group. We're based in Brighton, but we've got offices in different locations around the world. Epic's actually part of a larger group called Learning Technologies Group. And Epic will cease to exist relatively soon as we're merging with Line Communications, and there'll be a new organisation. So that this might be the last Epic presentation. You never know. I'm one of the people that helped to write the Tin Can specification. Well, obviously I'll explain what Tin Can is in a moment for people who don't know. But Tin Can was produced by, it's a collaborative process by a group of people. The final version was produced on GitHub, and I'm one of the people that contributed to that on GitHub. I run tincanapi.co.uk, which is a website with various guides and resources. There's a bit of information about what Tin Can is, and then some information for learning designers and some information for developers on there. And really, I put tincan.co.uk together. At the time, there really wasn't any. There was a lot telling you what Tin Can is, but not much to help you get started. So that's really the aim of tincanapi.co.uk. You can just about see it there. People asking what the address is. tincanapi.co.uk. The link's actually on the Moodle site as well. So that's there. It's a little bit out of date now, to be honest. I've not worked on it for a little while, but hopefully the information is still helpful. And now there are other websites that have got more up-to-date information on. For example, the Epic website has got various guides and resources that are on there. I've also written some, I'm going to call them prototype plugins for Moodle to begin to integrate Tin Can into Moodle, and we'll talk about those in a lot more detail later in the presentation. And I'm part of the technical board for Learning Locker. Learning Locker is an open source project, and it's an LRS, a learning record store. And we're going to talk about what an LRS is later on. And recently I've been working on building some stuff into Learning Locker to really set the groundwork for integrating Learning Locker into Moodle, or any LMS. Okay, so that's introduction to me. The session will start off with an introduction. That's this bit. We're going to talk a little bit about SCORM and Tin Can and what the differences are between SCORM and Tin Can. And that'll take a little while just to introduce you to Tin Can, so we're not really going to talk about Moodle much in that section. Then we're going to actually talk about Moodle, and we'll talk about the different ways that Tin Can could be integrated into Moodle. And it's not just as straightforward as saying, let's do Tin Can in Moodle, and now we've done it. There's actually a lot of different ways we could integrate Tin Can into Moodle, and it's really something that you could just do more and more and more of. We're going to look at progress to date, so in terms of doing that integration, what's been done so far, and really those two sections we'll do at the same time rather than one after the other, and then there'll be time for questions at the end, but there's not that many of us in here, so if you have questions at any point, feel free to ask in the chat, or if you're unmuted on the microphone, feel free just to shout out. Probably the chat is the easiest way to get my attention, and then I can stop at an appropriate point, but do feel free to interrupt at any time. One note on that, there are a couple of places where I'm going to be screen sharing, and when I'm screen sharing I can't see the chat, so I'll pick up any questions from screen sharing once I've finished that bit of screen sharing. Okay, so the first section we're looking at SCORM and Tin Can. So I want to find out a little bit about what you guys know. So I've got some questions on the screen for you there. to see what do you know about SCORM. So does anyone want to have a go at answering some of those questions, one of those questions? Either in the chat or on the microphone. Anybody? Does anybody know what SCORM is? Have you heard of SCORM? Oh, we've got some music from Sue there. So Natalie's saying it's a standard way of sharing learning content in a structured way. Yeah, exactly. So it's a way of packaging up content into a standard format in a zip file so it can be put onto an LMS. So I suppose that covers the first couple of questions. Does anybody work with SCORM on a regular basis? NASA created it. Not quite, Vinny. It's the American military created SCORM, an organization called ADL. And actually, the same organization are behind the Tin Can API. So the people behind SCORM are pushing Tin Can. Embedding interactivity in static content, sort of, yeah. So you could use SCORM to track interactive content. So it could be a way of embedding interactivity, yeah. Next, done. Yeah, that's a good definition, Natalie. So often SCORM content follows a very fixed structure and has got a particular way of doing things, and that's something I'm going to talk about in a bit. Does anyone know when the SCORM was created? Either when the first version was released or maybe when SCORM 1.2 was released. SCORM 1.2 is the most commonly used version today. 1999, good knowledge. Yes, so SCORM was originally envisaged in 1999, and SCORM 1.2, which is the most commonly used version, came out in 2001. And if you think about it, the world has moved on quite a lot since 2001. Did we have Facebook in 2001? I don't think we did. We had mobile phones, but not everybody had mobile phones, and there was mobile internet, I think, but it was very expensive and it was text-based. So the whole idea of mobiles and social media and all that kind of thing just didn't really exist. And even internet connections. A lot of people are still using dial-up. And so SCORM was designed really for a world of intranets rather than a world of the internet. And that's quite significant. So let's look now at how SCORM works at a high level. So SCORM works, everything will sit within the LMS. So the LMS might be Moodle, for example. And you might have a piece of e-learning content that is uploaded to the Moodle. That then sits inside the Moodle and it almost becomes part of Moodle. And then it uses the SCORM standard to send data to a database, and that data then feeds into reports. And there might be other Moodle activities. I'm sure you guys use forums and quizzes and all sorts. And that would also feed into the database, but not using the SCORM standard. And generally the data is going in one direction. So it's going from the e-learning into the database, into the reports. There is some data going backwards and forwards, but generally speaking, the data is going in one direction. So I've got a little test for you on the next slide. Tin Can, you spot the difference? I don't know if you like my pun there. Can anyone spot any differences there between the two slides? This is Tin Can versus SCORM on the previous slide. Double arrows, yeah. So the data is going both ways with Tin Can. So it's not just that the data is going e-learning, database, reports. It could go Moodle quiz into the database, feeding into a piece of e-learning. Or even you could track how are people using the reports, and then you might report on that, or you might feed that into something else. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Any other differences? LRS, yeah. So instead of a database, we've got an LRS storing the data. So an LRS is, in simple terms, or I suppose in technical terms, really, an LRS is technically a database with a set of APIs. An API is a way that two pieces of software can speak to one another. So an LRS is a database with a way that other pieces of software can speak to it and can put data into that database and take data out of the database. You wouldn't envisage learners would never really log on to an LRS. They'd probably log on to maybe some reporting system. They might log on to the learning. They might log on to the other experiences, but they wouldn't log on to the LRS itself. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone spot any other differences? There's one up here. So everything's happening on the internet. It's not within the LMS. It could be within the LMS, but each of these elements could be on a separate server. And in fact, you might have multiple LRSs on multiple servers speaking to one another, and then different reporting tools connecting into different LRSs. And so it's a distributed system is what's envisaged here, that things can sit on different servers and communicate. So for example, if you produce generic e-learning content, you might host your e-learning content on your own server rather than giving it to clients to put onto their LMS. And then all your different clients will connect into that e-learning, and that will be tracked back to their various different LRSs. Gareth, I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you? So the idea is that it's distributed across the internet, and that you could have stuff on different servers. In terms of whether it's fault tolerant, that probably is a question that sits outside the standard, and it'll be how you implement it. So you could do things like having redundancy and that kind of thing, but that's not specified in the standard at all. That's down to how you implement the standard. Yeah, it's a distributed system. Any other questions on that? Okay, brilliant. We'll move on to the next slide. So another couple of differences between SCORM and Tin Can. SCORM tends to deal with status. So Andrew's success status for the quiz is passed. Andrew's current score is 70%. Whereas Tin Can deals more with events. And Tin Can was really based on the activity streams specification, which is what's used by Twitter and Facebook and other systems like that, where you have a stream of activity. That's why it's called activity streams. So somebody posted a picture of a cat, somebody sent a message on Twitter, that kind of thing, and you get that stream of information. And Tin Can is events-based rather than status-based, primarily. So with Tin Can events, we have this I did this structure. So somebody, and then you've got a verb, somebody did something. And the idea of this slide is you could pick anything from this column, add anything from this column, and anything from this column, and make some interesting combinations of different things that you could track. And obviously these are just examples that, you could have any different type of person, any verb, and any object of that you could track. So this is the high level structure of Tin Can data, Tin Can events. And really what's important with the events is what happens as a result of that event. So I've actually pinned this slide from a presentation I did recently on designing for Tin Can. And when you're designing for Tin Can, you need to think about, you need to decide obviously what events are you going to track. And to do that, you need to think about, well, what's the result of that event? So it might be that the result of the event is that this is recorded in a report that's seen by a tutor. But it could be that the events feed into one another. So going back a couple of slides, it may be that what happens within a Moodle quiz can affect what happens in a piece of e-learning. And so an event triggered in the Moodle quiz, maybe somebody answered a question and they selected the fourth option. That means that when they come into the e-learning, their avatar in that e-learning is Susan. Who knows? It could be any different type of interaction. So really what's important when looking at Tin Can events is what happens next. This slide feeds into Natalie's definition earlier of next, done. So SCORM is really designed to track next quiz learning. That you have slides of e-learning. Maybe you have some interaction on those slides. Maybe you have a quiz in there. Normally the quiz comes at the end. And Tin Can is designed to report that type of learning experience. But what if you've got a learning experience that doesn't conform to that particular model? So, for example, if you've got a learning game where there isn't a concept of completion, you just get better and better and better, and you move up the levels, then SCORM doesn't really work, because what SCORM is designed to track is not a learning game. It's designed to track things that are either complete or not complete, and that have a score, normally a percentage score. So Tin Can really it restricts your design to a specific idea of thinking about learning experiences. Whereas with Tin Can, you can design your learning experience, and you've got freedom to do that, but then you have to design your tracking to suit that experience. So with SCORM, you kind of either do it or you don't. With Tin Can, you've actually got to think about the design of your tracking. And that's something that I'll try and remember to mention earlier on the later slide. Track blended learning. So, as I mentioned, Tin Can be used to track anything. And you'll often hear people say, Tin Can track absolutely anything. And that's broadly true, but not actually true, because you can't track cell division in one of your learners' brains or something like that, because you don't know that. There's no way of recording that. But really, Tin Can be used to track anything that can communicate with the internet. So if it's got an internet connection in some way, or it might have an internet connection in the future, so we can store data offline and send it later, as long as it can connect to the internet, Tin Can track it. And sometimes you could think creatively about how things connect to the internet. So if you think about a classroom event, obviously classrooms aren't obviously connected to the internet, but maybe the register for the classroom might be connected to the internet, and maybe the teacher, the tutor, the instructor has an application that records their observations of what learners are learning, and that could be connected to the internet. So really, Tin Can track a lot of different things, and obviously you've got the examples there. And Tin Can also be used to support a deeper blend of blended learning. Does everyone know what blended learning is? So I've got a question here from Gareth again. By internet, are you talking about Ethernet, and hence intranets work? Yeah, essentially. So anything that can connect to the LRS, which would be normally on the internet, but could be on an internal intranet. Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody made a copy of the internet that had a totally separate infrastructure, yeah, you could do that as well. So yes, you can have a private in-house system if you wanted to. Okay, so moving on to this slide. Blended learning. Can someone tell me what blended learning is? Anybody? No. Okay. Blended learning. The idea behind blended learning is that often we define mixed learning. Yeah, that's a good definition. Both face-to-face and distance learning. Yeah. So it's about having multiple learning elements used in French. I'm gonna have to ask more of detail. What do you mean by used in French? Combination of face-to-face and computer-mediated delivery there from Sue. Yeah, so it's basically, I mean, it can be face-to-face and computer-based stuff, but you could have blended learning where you've got a combination of a textbook and a face-to-face classroom. It doesn't have to involve computers necessarily, but it's just you've got multiple different learning media, different ways of learning. Not learning styles, different channels of learning, different learning elements, and they make up the learning experience. And blended learning is a very good thing to do, and it improves learning. It does help, and I'm sure there's loads of research on there that you can Google. But in practice, often blended learning ends up looking like these pictures on the left, where we've got different elements in our blended learning, but they're all separate. So you've got a shopping basket, a lunchbox, a TV dinner where everything is separate. We've got learning that happens on the Moodle, and we've got learning that happens in the classroom, and there's not really any relation between the two. There's no kind of coherent plan, and the learner thinks of them as separate experiences. Whereas actually blended learning works best where there is actually blending, that things are pureed together into a single learning experience. So if you think when you eat a cake, you don't think that's a nice bit of butter, that's a nice bit of sugar, that's a nice egg. You think that's a nice cake. It's all blended together into one whole, and that's the goal with, or can be the goal, is a good goal to have with blended learning, is that it comes across as being one learning experience. And Tin Can help to enable that, because what happens in one activity can be tracked and then responded to in another learning activity. Does that sort of make sense? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so let's have some feedback from you. Hands up if you use the SCORM module in Moodle. Who actually uses the SCORM module? So 3 of you there use the SCORM module. What other activities do you use? Gareth never really liked the SCORM module. Quiz is used. Yep. Anything else? Lots. What's your favourite module, Natalie? Forum. Yeah, quizzes and forums seem to be fairly common. Feedback and chat as well. Okay, and what about outside of Moodle? How do your learners learn outside of Moodle? Google shared documents? Yep. Anything else? Folios, Google Hangout, guides. They don't learn outside of Moodle. Do any of them attend face-to-face sessions, or do they look stuff up on the internet themselves? Do they read books? So really what I wanted to illustrate there is actually there's a lot of different ways that people do learn, and often it does happen outside of the Moodle. Particularly I come from, so Epic, with a lot of our clients are corporate clients, and you may have, or may not have come across the 70-20-10 model, and the idea there is that in the corporate world, 10% of what people learn is kind of the formal training, and then 20% is more social, and then the main bulk of what people learn is really informal, that they're learning on their own. So really, a lot of what people do learn often happens outside of the structures that we create for them in Moodle. And we might create other structures for them outside Moodle. And so just to illustrate that Tin Can track those things, and so you can paint a much broader picture of what learners do. And it can also track other activities in Moodle, not just the SCORM module. Okay, so that's Tin Can. Obviously, you're now all experts in Tin Can. You know absolutely everything there is to know about Tin Can. So we're going to move on to looking at Tin Can in Moodle. If any of you by any chance don't know everything there is to know about Tin Can, obviously there's the resources that I've put on the Moodle site that you can have a look at to learn a little bit more. So Tin Can in Moodle, as I mentioned, there's a number of different ways that we could approach integrating Tin Can into Moodle. And if you go onto the Moodle tracker, you'll notice that one of the top 10 most voted things is implementing Tin Can, or also known as Experience API, into Moodle. But what does that actually mean? In what way are we going to integrate Tin Can into Moodle? So in this section, I want to explore the different options and then talk to you about what progress has been made so far on each of those different options. And just to say that none of these are mutually exclusive, so we could do all of these things, and they would work together, but we could also just do one of them, and there would be benefit to that in and of itself. So the first way that Moodle could implement Tin Can API is that Moodle could launch e-learning content. So at the moment, Moodle launches SCORM content, for example. It can also launch LTI content. Thanks, Gareth, for that link. That's brilliant. So Moodle can launch e-learning content. And the idea here is that Moodle would launch the content. That content would then be tracked to an LRS that was specified within Moodle, and the LRS would then feed that data to reports and to other experiences would come in there as well. So really, Moodle kind of sends the learner out to the e-learning content, and then that is the end of Moodle's role in this particular example. So progress so far, there's actually two plugins. One of the plugins is the SCORM Cloud plugin. I don't know if any of you have come across SCORM Cloud or the SCORM Cloud plugin. SCORM Cloud is a commercial LMS, really, which is really designed for SCORM packages. But the guys behind SCORM Cloud have been heavily involved in the development of Tin Can. And so they've made their SCORM Cloud system work with Tin Can packages. So you can upload your Tin Can packages to the SCORM Cloud plugin, and that will work with SCORM Cloud LRS. But it only works with their particular LRS. It doesn't work with any other LRS. So you're kind of tied into SCORM Cloud if you go down that route. The other option is the Tin Can launch plugin, which I've developed, and there's a link for it there, and there's also a link on the Moodle site. And that will support any LRS, that will work with any Tin Can compliant LRS, but it's not really in a finished state. It's not really ready for you to use on your own system. So that needs more development work, and more development work is coming. So, watch this space for this one about how that's going to develop. And obviously contributions are very welcome. If anyone wants to get involved in helping to develop that, you are more than welcome to get involved and just get in touch. So, got my first screen share now, so bear with me. Hopefully this will work. If it's not working, please can somebody tell me in the audio, because as I say, I won't be able to see the chat. Okay, so I'm just setting this up. Loading here. Still loading. Getting there though. Right, here we are. You should now be able to see my screen. I can actually see if you raise your hands, actually. So if you can't see, maybe raise your hands. I've just lost it now. Right. You should be able to see a Moodle site again now. And that Moodle site is obviously it's using the clean theme. This is Moodle 2.6 with some plugins installed. And the one I want to show you here is these two examples here. These are two examples of launching Tin Can enabled learning experiences from Moodle. So let's start with the golf example. The golf example is a very old piece of e-learning that it's as old as SCORM, that was produced to demonstrate what SCORM can do, and this has been customized to show what Tin Can do, and it looks ugly, but it works. Marhan, can I mute you? Are you trying to say something, or are you just getting noise? Yeah, it looks like the noise has stopped. Oh, you're muted. Brilliant. Okay, so you see it's asking me, would I like to resume where I previously left off? I can click OK, and that's saved my space. I can then click through this. This is click. This is next quiz stuff, okay? So you can do next quiz stuff if you want to in Moodle. We're not going to go as far as the quiz. Sorry, not in Moodle. You can use Tin Can to track next quiz stuff. So if I now go to Learning Locker, you can see that this is now tracking what I've done, and it's showing that I've experienced different parts of the e-learning, and that's been tracked in an activity stream. We could also, there's various reports that we could use for that data. So Learning Locker is an open source LRS that is very much under development as well, not really ready to use yet, but again, it's getting there, so watch this space. So I can then just close this window. And notice that's not actually a pop-up. I don't know if any of you have had problems with pop-ups in the SCORM module. This opens in a new window, which means it's not blocked by pop-up blockers. Nice. So go back to the course. Got another example. This is an example of a learning game. Obviously, well, it's not really a learning game. It's a game. So this is Tetris, and I'm going to fail miserably at Tetris here. Give me a minute to lose all my lives. Excellent. So I think have I lost? Yeah, I've lost at Tetris. So now if I go back to Learning Locker and refresh the page, you can see I completed Tetris level 1, and I also attempted the Tetris prototype. So I can close that. So that's just an example of using Moodle to launch a learning experience and then tracking it back to an external LRS. Okay? So let's stop that screen share. Great. So that's that one. So obviously that can be used to launch e-learning produced by e-learning authoring tools. Does anyone use any e-learning authoring tools? And if so, which versions do you use? Captivate. So if you're using Captivate version 7, that supports TinCan version 1.0, which is brilliant. If you're using an earlier version of Captivate, you can actually make it work with TinCan. I've got some code that I've written that you can wrap around the Swift file published by an older version of Captivate, not the HTML5, just the Swift, and you can use that to generate TinCan in an older version of Captivate. But Captivate 7 includes TinCan support as standard. Yeah, so if you are using an authoring tool, I would recommend find out if it does support TinCan and find out what version it supports. So Articulate Storyline doesn't support the latest version of TinCan, which may cause you some difficulties depending on what you're using to connect in with that. Okay, so the next way that Moodle could be integrated with TinCan is, so we've still got launching the content, but we could also, Moodle could consume TinCan data. So we can take data out of the LRS, maybe that's come from the e-learning that's launched by Moodle, maybe that's come from somewhere else, and that's feeding into Moodle, probably as part of the reports. So we could have some reports in Moodle and also some reports outside of Moodle. And I've got an example of that. So I've got a learner stream plugin, and this is really just an early example. It's fairly ugly and basic, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. So I've forgotten how to share my screen. Here we are. Loading up. Okay, so you see we've got this block on the left-hand side, the TinCan learner stream, and all the data that's in the LRS is coming through to that block on the, not the left-hand side, the right-hand side. I've just realized I've not turned sharing on. Let me show you that again. Sorry, so everything that's on the right-hand side here in this block is being pulled through from the LRS here. So this is data from the LRS coming through to the Moodle there. The other way that we've got data coming through is this completion tracking. So you notice I've got a tick next to this Tetris example now because I completed that Tetris example. So we're pulling data from the LRS and we're using that to inform completion of a Moodle activity. And at the moment we can just do that for the TinCan launch links, but potentially in future we could have other activities marked completion based on TinCan tracking data. So that's that one. And again, that launch plugin, between those two slides, it's still not ready for production. So yeah, Natalie, workplace observation. So potentially you could have an application, maybe it's a mobile app or a tablet app or just something on a computer, where somebody's manager is observing them in the workplace, and or someone's tutor in a school or college or university environment, and they're marking off stuff about what the learner's done and that could potentially feed into either activity or course completion based on what they've done. And then obviously if it's getting into the Moodle completion, you can do all kinds of stuff like that, like conditional access and that kind of thing. So, hands up, does anyone have a Moodle that uses data that's generated outside of Moodle? So somehow you're integrating with a system outside of Moodle. And if so, what data do you use? And what data could you use? Maybe you're not doing this, but you think, well, actually, I'd quite like to use attendance data, or I'd quite like to use something else. Nobody? No, I was at Moodle in Edinburgh recently, and there were quite a few people saying that they were pulling in attendance data, data from many universities, pulling in attendance data to their Moodle to do stuff with that data. Or using data to enroll users onto courses and that kind of thing. Generally, though, when that is done, that's done in a bespoke way. So there was this one guy that was showing this at Edinburgh University. He was demoing a brilliant social platform that he'd built in Moodle, and he said, "Well, I can't really share the code because it's tied in to all these various platforms." And systems for the data that are specific to, I think it was Edinburgh University or Edinburgh College or something like that. But if he'd used Tin Can, maybe I don't know if he'd heard of Tin Can, but if he had used Tin Can, perhaps it would have been easier for somebody else to take that tool and drop it into another institution. Okay, so Moodle can also produce data. So it can launch e-learning content, it can get data into reports, but Moodle can also produce data out again. So we might have activities in Moodle, for example, the quiz activity, the forum, the chat, and we can take data out of that into the LRS and also feed data into those activities. So what have we got so far? We've got a plan. So if you look on the tracker, there's been some conversation around this, and I've also raised an issue, a tracker item around integrating Tin Can, particularly into the quiz module. And you may have noticed, if you read the release notes, Moodle 2.7 in the release notes, there's a new type of plugin called the log plugin, and it specifically mentions Tin Can there. I think this, don't know for sure, but I imagine this log plugin type was created specifically for Tin Can, but also obviously other types of thing could use a log type plugin. And the idea is there that a plugin hooks into the Moodle Events API. So the quiz module, for example, when something happens, maybe the learner submits the quiz, or they pass a quiz, or that kind of thing, the quiz module will fire off an event to Moodle Core, and we can have a log plugin that listens to that event and does something with it. And I've got a working proof of concept. This is actually built for Moodle 2.6, so it uses a report type plugin. But really, this is very much early days, and probably the code that I've written here is what I call disposable code. So, I've written that code, it sort of works, but it's really just to inform the design, and then we'll come back and build it properly, probably from scratch, maybe taking some elements of the code. But it's there enough to demo, so I can go into this example quiz. It's got a bug, so I have to go into it twice. So I'll reattempt the quiz, and then I'm going to get a blank screen. I'm not sharing again, am I? Sorry. Let me turn on sharing. So I'm going to share a region. Sharing, and I've managed to avoid sharing the bug, which is always good. So I'm going to go into the Moodle quiz. Give it a moment to load. I'm going to say true to the question. This is a very short quiz, this one. And I'm going to submit the quiz. So I've now submitted that quiz, and what's happened in the background is the quiz module has told Moodle Core that I've submitted the quiz, and Moodle Core has told my report plugin that I've submitted the quiz, and the report plugin has told the LRS that I've submitted the quiz, and then this Tin Can learner stream has gone and asked the LRS, and the LRS has told it that I've attempted the quiz. So that's where all the data's gone. And obviously that's just a first stepping stone. But you can imagine if we take that concept further, really anything in Moodle can be tracked with Tin Can and could feed into an LRS, be tracked in one single place using Tin Can reports, or could then be pulled back into Moodle as a kind of activity stream type thing to give information about what learners have been doing. So that's that particular module. Okay, so does anybody use data that's generated by Moodle outside your Moodle? Do you have any other systems that you download data from Moodle, or you've integrated them? Nobody? No? Well, if you did have systems like that, you could use Tin Can, again, to transfer that data. And again, it would be done in a standard way. So, if you were feeding stuff out into reports, or you were creating a dashboard for tutors, managers to see people's progress, you could feed Tin Can data into that. My final example is, could we put an LRS inside Moodle? So this actually looks a lot very similar to the SCORM example we had before. So within Moodle, we have an LRS inside Moodle, and we track e-learning that's inside Moodle to the LRS, and we use that data to feed into reports also inside Moodle. And maybe we're pushing that data out of Moodle and pulling another data into Moodle. But generally speaking, everything's happening inside Moodle, and that's another option. And it's still not mutually exclusive with the other options. Personally, I think why bother? Why should we build an LRS into Moodle? It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be very hard. And Learning Locker it really kind of demonstrates that. There's been a lot of work that's gone into producing Learning Locker as a separate open source LRS. And I think perhaps a similar example to this is Mahara. So you wouldn't create any portfolio in Moodle. It'd be a lot of work, and why bother? Because you just use Mahara, and Mahara can be easily integrated into Moodle. So I think it's better that we focus on completing the open source LRS outside of Moodle, and then integrating with Learning Locker LRS. That's my opinion. That said, there is a working LRS local plugin, and somebody's customized the SCORM module, and there's some links to that there. But it's designed for Moodle 2.4. The plugin's not maintained anymore. It may be that there is someone who potentially might be picking it up and doing some work on it, but I don't know. And it also only supports Articulate Storyline. It doesn't support any other Tin Can content, only Articulate Storyline. So that's where we are with that one. So I don't know, has anybody tried Learning Locker at all? I'm sensing maybe not. Natalie's tried Learning Locker. What did you think of Learning Locker, Natalie? Natalie loves Learning Locker. Brilliant. So Learning Locker can be quite tricky to install, and it's almost just because it's very different to how you install Moodle. But once you get the hang of it, once you've done it once and it all works, it's quite easy to install it again. And once you get it installed, it's quite a nice system to use and to update, and you can use it to play around with Tin Can data. Does anyone use Mahara? Yeah, so is Mahara easy to use with Moodle? Anyone else has used Mahara? Is it easy to use with Moodle? Okay, so it didn't work out for Natalie. I've not actually used Mahara personally, but I have heard that it is easy to integrate. And I imagine that Learning Locker would be equally easy to integrate with Moodle once we've done the work to integrate it. At the moment, there's a lot of work to do, but my aim is that in future, it should be very easy to have Learning Locker and Moodle working together. Okay, so we're on to the questions section now, and I've got a couple of questions that I think you might have that I'm going to run through, and then obviously there's the opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you actually have as well at the end. So, first question is, why bother using a standard? So maybe, well, it sounds like actually this isn't the case for a lot of you guys, but other people may be watching this later. You might be thinking, I already use web services to get data in and out of Moodle, so why would I want to use TinCan for that? Well, the advantage of using a standard is that you can create the plugins once and then you can reuse them. So you create something that TinCan set up to pull TinCan data into Moodle, and then when you next come to integrate a system into Moodle, you only have to do work on the system that you're integrating in to send TinCan data out. And then you just point that at your TinCan endpoint. It also means you can keep all your data in the same format. So it's all in a TinCan format, which makes it easier to report on and easier to build reporting tools. And it also means that you're compatible with future tools. So it may be that in future, the system that you're building your bespoke integration for is going to implement TinCan anyway. In which case, you're not having to maintain your bespoke integration. You can just use that tool's TinCan integration. So if you're going to use a standard, why should you use the TinCan standard? What about SCORM, Open Badges, LTI? There are other standards that you might use in different ways. Well, TinCan I think you should use because it's already seeing significant adoption. So for those of you using Adobe Captivate, TinCan is already supported in Captivate, and lots of other authoring tools support TinCan. You can actually use TinCan alongside Open Badges and LTI. So if you are using LTI and Open Badges, it's not really an either-or thing. They do slightly different things to TinCan. So you can use both of them. You can use them alongside one another. And then for SCORM, well, we've already seen that SCORM is very old, and you can translate SCORM data into TinCan. So if you have existing SCORM packages, you could do something to convert that SCORM data into TinCan data. But you can't really do it the other way around, because TinCan data is a lot richer than SCORM data. So you'd be losing information if you try and convert TinCan data into SCORM data. So that's why TinCan. Does anyone else have any other questions? You've been fairly quiet this session, so do you have any questions? Okay, so I've got two questions there. The first question is how long before the SCORM standard goes? I would say that I don't think SCORM's going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, there's still people producing a lot of SCORM-based content. In fact, more SCORM-based content has been produced than TinCan-based content, and content tends to have a certain life cycle. So I don't think SCORM's going away anytime soon, but I would hope that in the next 3 to 5 years, the balance would start to tip in favour of TinCan, and that we'd see TinCan being used a lot more than SCORM. But I don't think it's going to go anytime soon. Being events driven, do any events get lost? I mean that is something that absolutely needs to be considered. One of the ways that TinCan works is that you can, it's got 2 timestamps for any event. So it's got the timestamp that the event actually happened, and then the timestamp that the event was stored in the LRS. And that allows you to send data about things that happened in the past, and it's still got the right timestamp for when the event happened. So that means if an event is, basically if you send data about an event to an LRS, and you get an error code back, you can then try and send that data again and again and again until it gets through. So particularly if you're doing server-side tracking, so for example, if we're tracking the quiz module, we should be able to keep trying with sending events If you're tracking client side and the person loses their internet connection, there are things you can do to store the data, particularly if it's a mobile device, you can use HTML5 storage. But unless you're doing that, you're going to end up losing the data there, because if the user closes their browser and it's not been saved anywhere, it's not been saved anywhere. Does that answer your question, Gareth? Are there any other questions? Does anyone think they might want to start using Tin Can? Paula's going to have a play with it. I think Natalie's already been playing with it by the sound of things. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
Andrew, can I?
sorry.
Sorry, I just didn't
Yeah.
want to type. I just wanted to ask about the performance side of it, because currently in Moodle, and since it's been invented, we've had logs and we've had reports. And when I wasn't the administrator and I asked for them to be turned on, they said it would take 4 days for the server to run through and collect all of the data, because there was just so much data when you're working with large institutes. And even though they did eventually turn on and ran it for 3 weeks, and from a certain point on we then had data to look at, and other organisations I've spoken to don't fully use the limited data that's available now for lots of reasons. And it sounds like Tin Can is going to produce 1,000 times more data than that. So I suppose my question is, how are we going to create reports that make that data meaningful? Who's going to be making the reports, and who's going to be seeing those reports?
Okay, great question. So there's 2 questions there: the performance one and then the reports one. In terms of performance, I think that's something that we need to. It's an issue we need to think about. So the point we are in development with these plugins, that they're not ready for performance testing, and they're just kind of ideas really. So performance in terms of sending the data, triggering these events in Moodle and sending that data out to the LRS. There will be a performance overhead, absolutely. As to how big that overhead is, I'm not sure, and we need to try it out, I think, and see. We are hooking into the events API, so Moodle would already be triggering those events, so there wouldn't necessarily be an overhead there, but it's once you've triggered that event and then you send that to the LRS, what's the performance overhead? Also, if you're installing an LRS, are you going to install that on the same server as your Moodle system? In which case, obviously, the LRS is going to take up some resources. It could be on a separate server, but then obviously there's costs involved in that. So it is something that I think people need to consider when implementing Tin Can. In terms of performance on the LRS itself, the LRS uses something called a NoSQL database, which is specifically designed for big data, for large volumes of data, and will have higher performance than an SQL database for big data. So in terms of getting the data out of the LRS, theoretically at least, it should be faster than getting the data out of the Moodle database. To be honest, performance is not my area of expertise at all. So that's what I've told you is what I believe, and it really needs testing out, and perhaps people with more expertise on that area to chime in on that. Your other question about reports, who's going to be creating those reports, who are they for, all that kind of thing, that is what we need to design. So learning designers, I think, should be designing reports, and should be designing them for the different types of user. And it may be that at the moment we've got rapid e-learning authoring tools like Captivate and Storyline and that sort of thing. I imagine in the future maybe we'll have a rapid report authoring tool to allow people to create their own reports. So obviously we've got the custom report plugin in Moodle, but it could go, even beyond that and allow people to create their own dashboards, a bit like Google Analytics. If you haven't used Google Analytics, that's the kind of thing we could be creating, but with learning-related data rather than website and e-commerce related data. Gareth, did you want to chime in on the performance issue?
Hello, hello. Oh, you can hear me. Talk on my. No, it's only that I was going to explain that sort of NoSQL is just sort of like a flat. There is no database. There is no structure. Really, it's just a list of stuff. But the SQL is you have loads of different tables that you've actually made a conscious decision to structure all your data and to then combine things and get information out. So, I mean, it's only my understanding that NoSQL is quicker because you haven't got that sort of intermediate processing overhead because you don't have it. So if you store a NoSQL data in a SQL database, it tries to structurize and organizes it and it goes with it. But it's not always the solution. It's all depending on the scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the type of data you've got, doesn't it? And Tin Can has been designed with NoSQL databases in mind, so it's designed to work with that sort of database, and it's designed for large volumes of data. But that's very much been an issue in the minds of the people writing the specification, more technical people than me involved in doing that. Yeah. Any other questions or comments for anybody?
Yeah, that does address my concern because one of our institutes was so big that to run a backup of all their courses took so long. It took like 4 days to go through the whole site. So they just stopped backing up and decided that if they needed to restore a course, it was actually quicker to back up the whole Moodle site and restore a Moodle site and restore one course than to run constant backups because you're just dealing with so much data. But if you're not dealing with it in a database and SQL structure, I can see that you're not going to hit that ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there will be performance issues, but hopefully it's better with that database structure.
Thank you very, very much for that. I've been looking forward to this session and really got a lot out of it.
Thank you. Any other questions or anything?
I'll just jump back in. This is Vinny from the iMoot team. I'll just jump back in and say thank you very much, Andrew. That was great. Really, really enjoyable presentation. Very interesting slides as well. So thank you for presenting. If there are any more questions, people are welcome to kind of hang around and ask and share and things like that.
Right, thanks very much, Vinny, and thank you everybody for coming. And thank you for answering questions and being involved in the chat. I really appreciate that.
Cool. Enjoy the rest of the iMoot.